Thank you, everybody, for joining us at the live portion of our Southwest listening session. I'm on a couple devices right now because we have our Jamboard function and all this, and I'll go through that in a second, but we always start our digital events with our land declaration. So we'll just take a couple minutes to do that right now. Kitchener Centre is located on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral Indigenous peoples. It's also on the Haldimand Tract, land that was promised to the Six Nations of the Grand River. Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe called this dish with one spoon territory. Everyone made sure that the dish would never be empty by taking care of the land and all of the living beings on it. This advanced diplomacy continued until settlers colonized their lands, over 99.7% of Indigenous territory over 400 years. Settlers even took Indigenous territory that was given back from the colonial state to them. After the Haudenosaunee Six Nations of the Grand River fought for the British in the American Revolutionary War, Sir Frederick Haldimand granted them 10 kilometers of land on either side of the Grand River, now referred to as the Haldimand Tract. Of the entire Haldimand land tract promised to the Six Nations, quote, which them and their posterity are to enjoy forever, they currently control less than 5%. The dispossession of land is never peaceful. The way these lands were taken was genocide, stealing children from their homes and communities, erasing languages and cultures. Government neglect and criminalization, medical racism and abuse, cultural racism and appropriation, and so much more. This is how colonization works across the world, and Canada is a colonial country. Land declarations need action. As settlers, we pledge to follow the lead of Indigenous peoples in our path to reconciliation, to challenge other settlers to unlearn colonial and racist ways of thought, to support the return of land back into Indigenous stewardship across this country, and to hold Canada to account for its genocide against Indigenous peoples. We stand in solidarity with Indigenous peoples in Canada and across the world in their struggles for justice, freedom, and self-determination. Make sure I'm unmuted. Thank you all for joining us. This is just the live component of the month-long listening tour that we've been doing. And for the last week, we have been focusing our energies and attentions on the Southwest neighborhoods in Kitchener Centre. In our kind of very rough and pragmatic way of looking at a very large riding with a lot of people and dividing it into kind of smaller groups. We define Southwest as just kind of south of Victoria and then west of Portland. So those neighborhoods are wonderful neighborhoods. We also have the Cherry Hill, Cherry Park kind of distinction there that was funny last week because we had a conversation about that. But this week, we are so excited. We've been speaking with a lot of different people for the last week, but we have that for you in a Jamboard section. So if we could just share the Jamboard for today, people will be able to see a little bit more about what I'm talking about. Second. I see two of me actually, which is new. There we are. Okay, great. Lunchtime listening session. So this is our opportunity to carve out a time to meet with the community. We have our big issue lunchtime listening sessions that are held on Wednesdays, and then we have our neighborhood listening sessions on Fridays. One of the feedbacks that we actually heard was that lunchtime is a really busy time for people, so we will definitely take that into note for future live listening sessions. But we like that. We like that we learned them. We're going to create more responsive and kind of more accessible ones, depending on what your work schedule is and all of that going forward. So thank you already for that feedback. So the way that this works is that we're doing outreach. You can hear the lovely sounds of the neighborhood right outside my window. We're doing outreach and we are, canvassing and we're out in the neighborhood, but we're also receiving information, receiving it on our social media channels. We're receiving it through like email and different kinds of contact forms on our website. And so there's a lot of different kinds of forms of the way that this information comes into us. So what we do is we create boards where we can kind of visualize and document this. It can kind of get lost in the process if we're not, being kind of intentional about it. But also, it really is, this was actually introduced to me by a school teacher friend, but it helps us share the contents of these discussions, build on them in future kind of iterations, and remember what we spoke about, and have something to show to people who couldn't make this live session per se. So all of that is how we put the work in for this week's live listening session. Last week we had our northern neighborhoods, that was neighborhoods north of Victoria. Next week we will have our western neighborhoods, which is that big kind of swath of land that's west of, I think we did Frederick or Union on that way, but all the way to the Grand River. So, that's from Stanley Park to Victoria, or sorry, not Victoria Hills to Heritage Park, and just kind of in between those. Chicopee, a lot of them. I'm just trying to do my writing map. And then the final one we're doing is at the end of the month, last Friday of the month, I believe is the 30th, and that'll be the central neighborhood. So along the transportation corridor, south of Victoria, the market, DTK. So thank you so much for joining us. I think it's about time that we start our Southwest listening session. So we've been out in the neighborhood for a while. Can we move to slide 2, please? We've been out in the neighborhood for a while, and we have gotten a lot of great feedback. I just wanted to start really quickly with some of it. We can go to audience. If you have any questions or any comments that you want in the meantime, please just put them in, raise your hand, and I will call to you. But I just usually start these with a little bit of an overview of what we've heard so far. So last week at our affordable housing listening session, we actually had the Social Development Center come in and tell us a lot more about evictions and rent evictions. And they hinted us to the fact that these were actually happening not necessarily only where we thought, which was, along that transit core. That's just what they were studying. They were saying that there were actually more and more evictions happening outside the residential core that we imagine it. And that did kind of bear true. We saw a lot of we heard about a lot of people who were really nervous about their rental situation. We saw a lot of different properties for sale, and the ones on the big lots that have those conversations. We actually had a couple specific conversations with homeowners I'll get to when we talk about perspectives and experiences. We also had our first canvas. So we were out in the Highland area near the Sobeys. That's Highland and Belmont, I think, are the two intersecting streets. We had a group of 8 people, and we took on 2 polls, our first 2 polls as a team, and that was just a really exciting event for us, a milestone for us, but it was also really, really great to hear from people. And we got a couple of those people to agree to allow us to share what they told us coming up as well. We saw a lot of lawn signs that definitely shared their perspective on a lot of social issues, a lot of global issues. We have a collection of those photos started, and I think we're going to make a really nice post about it soon. And then I just wanted to highlight, I think, for me, the jewel of Southwest neighborhood. Not every, it's all beautiful, but I do love me some McLennan Park at sunset. So here in this kind of background shot, I can pull it out in a second, but it's just that iconic shot of how beautiful it looks at that golden hour at the top of McLennan Hill, aka Mount Trashmore. Let me see if I can do this right now. Move this to the front. No, okay. So let's just go through some of the things that we've been hearing and chat about that really quickly, and then we can kind of go to the audience unless there's something. Okay, great. Let me see chat. Opening it. Great. So the first thing that I wanted to share were some of the firsthand experiences, the individual experiences that we encountered. We heard from Paul in Southdale. Definitely had some major concerns about the construction on Ottawa Street and getting around. Paul is a cyclist and doesn't find it safe maneuvering in and around it. I think even cars don't find that intersection safe. That does kind of work into the region's policy or the region's kind of growing cycling infrastructure. But we had a great chat about, what the federal government can be doing about creating better infrastructure and creating, stronger stronger cycling networks, but also other options than just automobile and car transportation. We spoke with Terry. We didn't get a neighborhood from Terry, but they said that they were concerned about the number of doctors that we have as a country, and that we need to increase healthcare funding. I thought that was a really important note that they sent. Kelly, who lives near St. Mary's Hospital, has worked actually as a healthcare worker and worked the entire pandemic. She's exhausted. She's exhausted, and she wants to see that work kind of transition to changes across the board. She said that for her, a universal basic income is the most important policy that she could think of. Even as a healthcare worker, it wasn't necessarily the improving healthcare or funding healthcare in those ways. It was a universal basic income because she saw how her friends who lost their work and who really suffered would have, they benefited from the CERB, but really it's about what that means, the mental health, the emotional health, the safety, the security, the planning ability that she saw just with this one policy tool was why she wanted to have that be her number one. And I respect that. Janelle in Mill Cortland, very concerned about housing prices. Even though Janelle herself is a homeowner, she's super concerned with what she's seeing happening at the other homes around her. She actually walked me around the block and showed me an example of a house that had been recently sold. The elderly grandmother who had been living there, the children sold it to developers, and they were already, they're cutting down, very old trees to kind of create space for, I believe it is triplexes or medium density. And so we had a great conversation about the need for medium density builds. Like we had a great conversation about why that's better, for the neighborhood to bring more families in and enjoying that space. But there was kind of the question of, well, who's moving into these new builds? Who can afford it? What are the prices of these going to be? She noted the different prices of a duplex that had, a similar process had happened, and it was not affordable. So that is a huge issue in terms of creating new housing, but also, is that housing affordable? Is that housing accessible? Can families move in there? And so that was a huge concern for her. And I think in that neighborhood, it actually was echoed a couple times. People will point to me at houses for sale that already had a sold sign, even though it hadn't even, hit the market they had heard. So definitely housing, and definitely the market was very an amplified concern, especially around Mill Cortland areas. John, who's back at the Canvas, West Mountain Highland, he also worked every single day throughout the pandemic. He didn't have any breaks. He is only taking his first vacation now, which is, that's a lot. And I think he's angry. Like I won't even gloss too much over. He looks at kind of how things happen and the way things rolled out, and he's not impressed with the decisions that were made. And he thinks that a lot of people profited, or a lot of corporations rather, profited off of this, while workers, just the everyday Canadians, taxpayers, did not benefit from this. We are not financially better off as individuals, the vast majority of us now, than we were, 2 years ago. So what he was talking about, where's the equity in this, and how are we going to make sure that first of all, anybody, the corporations that profited or that took that took the government relief, how are we going to make sure that becomes fair and square again? Fair and square, his words. And then the second thing that he said was, how can you support the little guy? And what are the ways that you're going to be changing that and changing kind of how this system is working? So definitely noted from John. For Dose in Victoria Hills is a Syrian refugee, and she is very concerned about housing as well. She is noticing a lot of the houses around her go, and she is dealing with kind of those concerns and not knowing what would be next if they didn't have an affordable $1,600 a month payment, and then what would they be looking for as a family of four? But I think, when I was distilling it, it was really about the isolation that she was feeling. She used to go to St. Louis and now and to adult language classes. And now those are not happening anymore in person. They're online, but it's not the same. And with online classes for her 2 children and managing that, it's too much screens for her. She's not as engaged and as curious a student as she was when they were in-person classes. Also, just the fear of plans delayed. The security of coming to Canada is a lot harder for her to fund, I would say, in translating just the note that I have. So those are some of the first perspectives and experiences that we have heard in just the last little bit since we've launched 2 weeks ago from people in the Southwest neighborhoods that we have spoken to. I just wanted to really quickly ask if there's anybody in chat who wanted to share really quickly their experiences. We won't put anybody on the spot, but if an attendee does want to just say how they've been, we'll give you panelist mode if you just raise your hand. So just putting that out there, but nobody's on the spot. Also, you can ask questions. If you want to go through the chat, there's also a Q&A button at the top. So you can post a question and I will be sure to answer those. But as you're all staying silent, let's just kind of keep going on this. So we also, so these are the perspectives, these are what they sound like in these individual kinds of situations, right? And we know that these systemic and policy issues manifest in our lives very differently based on a number of factors. But I think that no matter how they manifest, in your life and how you experience them, they're threads and they kind of keep asking a lot of the same big questions. So now let's just go through some of those themes and those big questions that go beyond the testimonials and maybe shape a bit of a broader issue of those change or a broader view, a frame of those changes. So we heard this a lot. I've been calling people, and the big question that I keep hearing is affordability. That's how am I supposed to keep paying for this? I don't understand. Every month this bill gets higher, or I just got a rent increase, but I'm pretty sure my landlord is looking to sell and I know I can't enter into the market on that. Or I'm a student, I am struggling to pay for tuition and I'm just doing that so I can, work a job that won't even let me pay that back. And so affordability kept being repeated throughout so many of these conversations. Even people who hadn't necessarily lost income or lost security also mentioned A, that prices were going up, but B, they had serious concern for poverty and homelessness. Like it's noticeable. I don't live in that area. I live in downtown Kitchener, so it's even more kind of acute. But we had people in residential neighborhoods that you might not consider exposed to the sad truth of poverty, which is that if you don't have a place to live, you don't have options. And so where you are is sometimes just where you are. And they were kind of grappling with this. So what we can tell from that is that we're not really doing as good of a job kind of in the core sections or in the core services that we could be providing to actually prevent homelessness and that kind of poverty increasing as we're seeing it. So that requires money, that requires investments, and that requires effort and will. So that actually was another part of the affordability refrain that kept being repeated. The third thing that we heard about affordability a lot was just the question of, I moved here because it was affordable. Well, I now have to leave because it's not, and I can't afford it here anymore. I heard that a lot too. I think that's a very, very fair question. We have for a long time touted how affordable we are. I mean, we're still more affordable, I guess, relatively than Toronto or another kind of massive city, but the amount of how expensive and how uninclusive the costs of living in this area have been over the last year. Like $200,000 in a residential home of average buying price in just one calendar year. People are very, very seriously considering not being able to stay in this region anymore, and what that means and where they would have to go. I know when I was rent evicted in February of last year, one of the families that was in the building, they couldn't afford to stay in town. They moved to his parents in New Brunswick. He had been a server. She had also been in the service industry. They didn't have a new kind of source of income. And for them, it just wasn't an option for them to stay and to battle on this kind of market. So they went, and we're hearing a lot of that. So I definitely think that affordability and the systems of unaffordability, how they're all kind of related, is going to be a big one, because those require systemic solutions. So we'll be talking a lot more about that, and we'll be thinking a lot more about how that manifests in the lives of residents in Kitchener Centre. Other big questions that we kept hearing were definitely about children and the youth. A lot of parents are very concerned about their children, their mental health, their socialization, their development, their happiness. I heard a couple stories about children that just aren't, they changed, they're depressed, they're worried. And that is definitely very, very worrisome to hear. And obviously something I think we need to focus on a national level, but also just their future, right? I think a part of it is, of course, the last couple of years have been so difficult. But I think a lot of kids right now are also waking up to the fact that the planning on a systemic level isn't going to necessarily make future years much easier for them. We are failing to plan ahead, and we're failing to make generational decisions that can actually, advance their futures. And what a 10-year-old right now is thinking of their retirement age is so different than what, somebody retirement age right now grew up thinking they could be working into. And so right now, what a lot of people I think are talking to me about is a little bit of not a little bit, a lot of just wanting a change for the next generation, and thinking about how they have been affected by this. And so that's definitely something we want to be talking about. We actually have our youth listening session next week. So it's about listening to youth and their kind of concerns, doing that targeted outreach. But we're clearly hearing that the people who love young people as well are very, very concerned for their futures, and impatient for solutions, impatient for kind of new policies for them, for young people, which is, I don't know that I've heard that as much before. I think definitely having education and kids' socialization affected so dramatically probably made a lot of those other connections more urgent for people. The last thread that we had in big kind of questions, and that's kind of from John, but also other people that we heard from in the neighborhoods, of an equitable recovery, or what does it mean that, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer? How are we going to kind of fix that? John specifically noted that large corporations had received different government subsidy or government kinds of fundings, and then also had posted record profits. But he was also just talking about, I think the systems, and that many of them failed a lot of people. So how are we going to actually make sure that when we're building forward and we're investing money in what we're doing next, that we are making sure that people who've been most vulnerable and most affected have been thought of first? So John and I had a good chat. For me, think that this equitable recovery is going to involve us investing in our social safety net. That's the investment. The investment is in healthcare. The investment is in the basic income. The investments are in infrastructure and making sure that we have good transit infrastructure. It's also in telecom infrastructure and making sure that Canadians, every person in Canada, has access to high quality, affordable broadband. These are the things that would make it so that online school, for example, doesn't become class dependent. If you don't have a fast enough network for you to do Zoom, you can't connect video a lot of times when you're in class. These are the types of things that we don't really think about when we're thinking about equity and how accessibility affects young people. But it also means that we're going to be making sure that the money that we're putting back after this pandemic for a recovery, to avoid a recession, to avoid future economic disaster, can't be spent on wealthy organizations and wealthy people. It has to be spent building up the social safety net and building up those who are vulnerable and their ability to participate. That's how we lift the economy. John and I got along really well after I made that point, and it went really well after that. But all of that kind of came together in terms of these big questions, and taught us a little bit and made us kind of concerned about I'm just checking the chat really quickly, keep checking it in. So somebody from the affordability, somebody said that now rent in Kitchener is just a couple $100s a month cheaper than it is in Toronto. So that is obviously not a great development for us as a community. And I'm coming from somebody who's worked in the tech community a lot. That's one of our calling cards. We call ourselves a more affordable place to live. We don't have the same salaries that we can compete with Silicon Valley in California. But what we say is that you keep more in your pocket because it's so affordable and so reasonable to live here. If we can't say that anymore, a lot of that attraction of really high quality talent and of really interesting people from all over the world, and brain power and innovation power, but also just building our community and more neighbors and more great neighbors is always a good thing. But we can't do that if we are an exclusive community, if we are not making important and kind of critical investments in how we can bring people in. So our housing market is a huge part of it. The way that we think about poverty, homelessness, the way we think about the social safety net and inclusion is also part of it. But we also we need to make sure that we go further than that, and that we're not just held back by what people say, we can or can't do. I think what we're looking at right now is the chance to say we have lost a lot over the last year, right? A lot of us have been changed. A lot of us have had a lot changed. So how do we change back? How do we change our world? How do we change the systems? How do we make them more equitable? I think the desire is there. And I'm hearing a lot of that frustration. I'm just always going to pause again. So another thing that we kind of heard was that, so we heard the feedback about the listening tour session format at lunch being, we would love to join the live session, but it's not the best time. So we'll come back with a tweak time. Another thing that we heard was that Zoom calls are great. Phoning people is great. Showing up at their door is great too. But what they want is more policy that makes sense to them. And so it's really hard to get one size fits all policies on any one piece of communication or anything like that. So we're going to start pivoting to a targeted outreach, I think, because I think a lot of different groups want to be hearing about different parts of the NDP platform, but also different parts of their lives, and their concerns are different. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of our next steps, and then we can talk more about that in a second. So our first next step is just to continue this listening tour. We have given ourselves just the month of June to breathe in this listening and to take in as much as we can, and we're not done. And even if we didn't hear from you for the Southwest listening session, we're not done canvassing Southwest neighborhoods either. We're going to be in your neighborhood a lot more now. You are going to see people wearing tie-dyed orange t-shirts and handing out that general literature. But what we want to do is do that targeted outreach. So for targeted outreach, we have identified within the Southwest neighborhood a couple communities that we want to be focusing on. If there's others, we will obviously add those. But just from our kind of first week of looking around and asking around, we have definitely heard that small businesses want to be asked more questions. Small businesses are people too, right? They are an owner and a shopkeeper and a manager and the front shop person and the delivery person, and they all have stories to tell. So we're going to be doing a lot of small business outreach. We will also be focusing on older people. One of the feedbacks that we heard on the phone was that when we're doing these kinds of canvases, a lot of times the different kind of elderly communities are either lumped in as one or kind of forgotten about, or they only, hear from anyone during an election and then they never hear from anyone again. And so we know, I think we all know just how devastating and worrisome the last couple of years have been for people who love elderly people. And I just can't imagine how that must have felt to have been an older person, to be living in an older care or congregate living setting, whether that is long-term care, that's medical, if you need medical support, or even if it's just unassisted living. It's scary. It's been a scary time, but we need to make sure that elderly people are included and brought into everything that we're doing, that we are creating targeted outreach for them. Font's too small. We're going to make a new run with larger font, and we're going to make sure that we are hosting listening sessions at the different retirement communities, safely distanced outdoors, but people are not as comfortable over Zoom, and the phone times are not usually, they don't usually work that well for them. So another thing that we heard was we should translate our outreach documents. That also came from calling, where language was a barrier between some of our volunteers and the people that they were contacting, especially towards the southern part of the Southwest neighborhood. So we're going to also be doing translated outreach documents. That'll take a lot more time, but it's really important to us that we make sure that if English isn't your first language and you're not going to understand everything that we're saying to you, that we do the work to just get a translation that works for you. It's a minimum kind of effort, but it means that you've gotten at least the basic information, and then we can kind of build from there. And then the final thing that we are going to keep doing a lot more of is speaking with neighborhood associations. We know there's a lot of really, really active residents in each neighborhood association, but we don't, we don't want to just kind of come in saddles blazing. We wanted to be able to show what we had heard, and we wanted to be able to, listen, and also offer action and offer types of contacts or types of experiences or connections that we could make. So now I feel like we are in a better position to do that outreach. So if there are neighborhood or community associations that you're a part of, or you want us to contact, or you think we should be speaking with, definitely do tell us that. Definitely do send us an email at listening@beisanzubi.ca. You can visit beisanzubi.ca, which is our website, /listening tour, but you can also just find that it's right, I think, on the header. And then also on social media, we're receiving a lot of feedback that way. I actually have a couple of those ready. I'm going to see if I can, one second. I've never done this part before, but we'll see if it works. Not working. Okay, we will share those. I promise I will just do a screen grab and we will share them in the final video. But we got a couple really, really great comments before every listening session. That's my dog, Luna. Luna, come here. Come here. Come here. Come here. Come here. Okay, she's here. Before every listening session, I put out a call on my social media for any followers. We have a special guest too. For any followers to just share how they're doing if they live in those sessions. And so we got two. One of them, affordable housing, affordability. Yeah, I would comment about the rising costs the rising prices of costs in my neighborhood. I am seeing rents go up by $100, $200 on relist, and I cannot afford any house on my street, even though I'm lucky to have bought mine in 2010. That is definitely something that we have heard a lot of, which is a distraction. So that is definitely something that we have heard a lot of in that affordability part, but we've been hearing that from every single neighborhood. This is not just something in the Southwest neighborhoods. I think maybe what the surprise was just the intensity of that as well. The fact that these changes and these concerns are not isolated to maybe you would have thought just around that downtown core when that change is more visible and I think maybe more obvious. I think it's just still happening all over our city. We're just not seeing it yet. So that's definitely a big one. The other comment, yeah, okay. So we've shared our next steps. We still have a couple more listening sessions to go. Next week, we will be speaking with youth. The week after that, we will be speaking about an equitable recovery. So I think that's going to be a really, really big one in terms of putting together a lot of the big themes that have been coming up all through the listening session, but really emphasizing the idea that our budgets and our spending are our priorities. So how do we make sure that equity is our priority and it's shown in our budgeting? So just going to go to the audience one more time. I kind of want to put someone on the spot to just see, if they'd say anything. Hi, good girl. Okay. No, I think everybody maybe just wants to get back to their days as usual. And we usually run these ones 45 minutes. So I am going to leave you with just really quickly, Jean-Luc, can we play our volunteer video? We made a really great video from the campaign perspective of what it's like to get involved with our team. We are currently looking for more members. We're growing, we're almost 30, which is just so exciting for me every time that number just ticks up, because it's not numbers, it's people who have so many ideas and so much passion. But yeah, 30 is just wild to say, but we know that's not even close to where we need to be in an election. So if you're at all interested, you can email volunteers@beisanzubi.ca and we can tell you exactly, the types of volunteer work that we have available and ways to get involved. But before that, maybe watch this video and you can find out a little more now. Hi, my name is Beisan Zubi, and that's not me, but I am your NDP candidate for Member of Parliament in Kitchener Centre. This year, coming together to create change is more urgent than ever. We're fighting for affordable housing, for healthcare, for our futures. I'm ready to go to Ottawa and fight for you, but I'm not alone. Our team has been hard at work getting ready to launch a listening tour, community engagements, and other events. But we need people like you to join our communications, operations, and outreach efforts and help us build a movement. All volunteers will be invited into a supportive and collaborative community with friendly team leaders and have access to a resource library and weekly learning sessions, including bystander intervention training offered by the Sexual Assault Support Center. Our campaign has a social responsibility pledge. 10% of all our fundraising goes to accessibility, and another 10% goes to our $20 an hour living wage fund. Affording the time to volunteer is a privilege, and creating an accessible space for everyone to get politically involved at this pivotal moment in our history is one of our most important responsibilities. Visit www.beisanzubi.ca/join-team to join our team, register for an election sign of support, or to find out more. Thank you. I love that video and I love little cartoony me. So yeah, we have a really great team and we are ramping up. We have 3 main kind of bodies that are very active right now. Our communications team that are making really wonderful messaging and oh, there we go. I'm big again. Like really great messaging documents and videos just like that. We have an operations team that makes sure that we stay the car running. And then we have an outreach team that did a canvas last weekend, but that will be doing this really exciting targeted outreach and trying to figure out how we can meet people where they are, can keep meeting people where they are, and create more opportunities for them to get involved and be heard. So all of that is really exciting. Thank you all so much for spending your lunch hour with me. I am now covered in dog hair, as one is when one wears black and has a white dog. But thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions, please do email Beisan at beisanzubi.ca. Visit beisanzubi.ca, follow us on social media, ask them there, and stay involved. This is a really important time. We're at a really exciting moment in our history, and we might be in an election within a matter of weeks. So this is the time. If you have an issue that matters to you, if you have something that you want to change, now's the time to do something about it. So join us, find out more, and stay safe as we enter into phase 3 today of our reopening plan. Thank you all.